Good evening, dear guests and dear participants. I'd like to welcome you to the PAU-DELL Talk tonight. And I'm honored to announce, and I'm honored to present Professor Dr. Is from Kültür University. And first of all, I'd like to thank her for accepting our invitation to give a talk at PAU-DELL Talk tonight. And let me introduce her. Professor Is is the head of English Language and Literature Department at Kültür University. In 2018, she retired from Boğaziçi University in Istanbul, where she was the founding director of the Critical and Cultural Studies graduate program. She also worked as an adjunct professor at Koç University for 7 years. She studied critical and cultural studies at the University of Wales, Cardiff, under a scholarship from the British Council and British Petroleum Fund, and received her MA and PhD from Boğaziçi University. She is also the founding president of the English Language and Literature Association, a board member of the European Society for the Study of English, and former president of the Poetics and Linguistics Association. She is a senior founder member of the Núcleo de Estudios Anglistocos Germanistocos at the University of Madeira, Portugal. She is also the alumna of USIS, United States Information Service, Fund for International Scholarship in the United States of America. Her research interests include critical and cultural theory, drama, gender studies, and narratology. She teaches critical theory, gender and queer studies and drama, especially Shakespeare studies and contemporary women writers, with a special emphasis on Katie Aker, Sarah Kane, Sarah Rule on the graduate level. Under the Critical and Cultural Studies program, she was first to organize in Turkey a series of queer studies conferences at Boğaziçi University that brought together international academics and activists. Professor Bash has also been a visiting scholar and visiting lecturer at University of Leeds, University of Wales, Pontificia Universidade Católica de Rio de Janeiro. She has worked at the dramaturg of a Hamlet production directed by Adrian Bryan and staged by the Istanbul Municipality Theatre between 2003 and 2006, and has produced and prepared women's art and culture programs for the Turkish State Television, TRT. While serving on the executive committee of the Women's Library and Information Center in Turkey, she has forwarded projects that elicit the voices of unheard women writers. She has published widely on postmodernism and contemporary writers and on the politics of gendered identity and its relation to history and narration. She co-edited Challenging the Boundaries with Donald Freeman and wrote Looking Awry at Contemporary Fiction, Post-Porn Modernism. She is writing a book on post-porn modernism, analyzing the themes of death and violence in contemporary culture. She has served on the executive boards of several NGOs, including the board of the Turkish Red Crescent, appointed by the President of the Turkish Republic. She is also an active member of several international women's organizations, including ICAN, WASL, and AWID, and a leading member of EŞİK, a platform bringing together 360 women's organizations in Turkey. Professor Bash is the former president of the Women's Library and Information Center Foundation in Turkey and is currently on the foundation's board. And please welcome Professor Dr. Is. The title of her talk tonight is Broken Dreams of a Safe Home in Andre Dubus's House of Sand and Fog. Professor Bash, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mehmet Ali Hocam. It was a very extensive introduction, but thank you so much. Now I'm going to talk about, of course, a novel here, but I would like to start with a slide which will not be very pleasant right now. So I'm sorry beforehand for starting this talk with something which will maybe make you sad and think about what's happening in the world. It was September the 2nd, 2015, when the image of a boy's body on a Turkish beach shook social media. This image even outraged leaders in Canada, where the child's family had hoped to rebuild a home, and many others like us who were helplessly watching the European migrant crisis unfold. 2-year-old Aylan Kurdi was born into a country eaten up by war. Since the Syrian conflict began in March 2011, around 6.5 million people have been displaced within the country's borders, about half of which, that is 3 million, were children. That is to say, since 2011, an average of 25 children have been displaced every hour and every day. Like other parents, Aylan's parents, Abdullah and Rehan, only wanted a better life for Aylan and his 4-year-old brother Galip than they had in Kobani, Syria. They wanted what everyone does, what hundreds of thousands of people fleeing violence who have flooded Europe want: a safe home. Trying to make the simple but treacherous dream a reality, Aylan, his brother, and mother drowned. No other image of immigrant bodies washed to the shore raised that much concern. Could that be because with the wave of more migrants trying to reach their land, the Western world secretly believed that the sea dividing the East from the West forms a natural barrier, punishing those daring pass the boundary? This may sound too harsh to you, but foreign bodies have always been considered a threat, hence less than human, a grotesque body which threatens inversion or transgression of the social order, an object to be thrown out, an excess vomited off the main body that delusionally thrives on the classical image of a healthy, seamless corporeal body. Unconsciously, this is idealized in the Western mind. In fact, Mikhail Bakhtin, in his influential study Rabelais and His World, foregrounds this concept of the classical body and the grotesque as important categories in the formation of Western bourgeois subjectivity. And this is taken from Bakhtin's work. The grotesque body, he says, is a body in the act of becoming. It is never finished, never completed. It is continually built, created, and builds and creates another body. Moreover, the body swallows the world and is itself swallowed by the world. The artistic logic of the grotesque image ignores the closed, smooth, and impenetrable surface of the body and retains only its excrescences, sprouts, buds, and orifices, only that which leads beyond the body's limited space or into the body's depths. The grotesque ignores the impenetrable surface that closes and limits the body as a separate and completed phenomenon. The grotesque image displays not only the outward, but also the inner features of the body: blood, bowels, heart, and other organs. The outward and inward features are often merged into one. We have already sufficiently stressed the fact that grotesque imagery constructs what we might call a double body. In the endless chain of bodily life, it retains the parts in which one link joins the other, in which the life of one body is born from the death of the preceding, older one. This body can merge with various natural phenomena, with mountains, rivers, seas, islands, and continents. It can fill the entire universe. The immigrant's body is similarly a type of fluid and grotesque body, a compendium of parts, as it is inscribed by various discourses of difference. As Cohen puts it, it is a body across which difference has been repeatedly written. A body that is grotesquely fragmented and incoherent. Incoherent, I repeat, because it is a palimpsest upon which various discourses inscribe their presence. It is also a monster, an abnormal body, an anomalous and hybrid being that violates the cultural categories, systems, and orders. As Kristeva explains, it is what does not respect borders, positions, and rules, the in-between, the ambiguous, the composite. Moreover, the immigrant's body is not only a commodity in the hands of globally organized migration merchants, but it is continually stripped of its historicity as well. The West willfully thwarts its gaze from its own colonizing past and present terror strategies. The number of uprooted people worldwide has more than doubled in the last 10 years as the circumstances of their displacement, such as war and ethnic persecution, and Western world's disastrous policies in countries such as Libya, Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria have also become much more serious. In a sense, like Shelley's monster in Frankenstein, the immigrant is a creation coming back to haunt its maker. It is the violence of decolonization of which Fanon wrote so powerfully in the 1960s. Going back to our dominant imagery of the sea as a barrier, we can consider it as that threshold space, like a forest in a fairy tale, beyond the law, in between nature and culture. As Stuart Hall tells us in his lecture on race, then the body of the immigrant on the sea becomes the floating signifier, exploited as part of a larger classificatory system of cultural intelligibility and social order. Moreover, the sea is an open space of risk, where the threat of death is juxtaposed with an exposure to the world and to others in it, that leaves the immigrant with a life of nothing more than mere survival. This is precisely what Agamben argues of the refugee, that he or she is neither dead or alive, but exists in a zone of suspension. In the Odyssey, remember, the sea seems to represent the huge gulf between the power of man and the power of gods. Odysseus himself describes the sea as such. We are Achaeans coming from Troy, beaten of our true course by winds from every direction across the great gulf of the open sea, making for home by the wrong way, on the wrong courses. This little passage sums it all. The tragedy of a small boat and a handful of people putting themselves at the mercy of the wind and the sea as their bodies turn into symbols of suffering, subject to angry gods in their desperate attempt to find a home. According to Julia Kristeva, abjection and migration are linked, in that the ontology of the abject is always concerned with place. In Kristevan terms, the abject is an exiled deject that asks where rather than who. The one by whom the object exists is thus a deject, who places himself or herself, separates himself or herself, situates himself or herself, and therefore strays instead of getting his bearings, desirings, belonging, or refusing. The immigrant's status as anomaly, his essential foreignness, is a recurring theme in contemporary literature. Today, from Muhsin Hamid to Leyla Abu Leyla, there is a diverse corpus of texts addressing the experience of migration, especially that of the Muslim minorities in Europe and the United States. Many of these works are post-9/11, depicting the immigrant body as a potential terrorist threat, subject of extreme ideological violence, ready to explode itself at the heart of the Western world. One of the earliest novels that deal with the anxiety of receiving societies in claiming the immigrants as suspects too, as well as their personal struggle in claiming a space in their resident country, is André Dubuis's House of Land and Fog. It is a pre-9/11 novel, written 2 years before the attacks, through which the American government has created a climate of fear and divisiveness by way of their calculated employment of a variety of persuasive definitions of terrorism, and in their greater and enduring use of the war of terror. André Dubuis, the son of a high acclaimed short story writer bearing the same name, communicates the impossibility of a dominant culture's integration of colonized minorities in contemporary American society. House of Sand and Fog, Dubuis's second novel, is the first American bestseller centered on a Muslim protagonist. A finalist for the National Book Award and made into a major film, it has its origins in Dubuis's experiences with his Iranian college girlfriend and her family. He writes elsewhere that he learned about Iranian food and culture from her family. In addition, he had an Iranian friend whose father had been a colonel and knew the Shah. He saw this man fumble in the United States, couldn't find a job, and ended up working at a convenience store. We learned that Dubuis had also read a newspaper account of a woman who had been evicted from her home for failing to pay taxes she did not owe. The combination of these sources provide the basis of the novel. The book centers around the tragic consequences of exile for an Iranian-American family in Los Angeles. Its patriarch is Masoud Amir Behrani, a former colonel during the Shah's rule. He purchases a house that is mistakenly repossessed from its former owner, an Italian-American woman named Katie Lazzaro. She is a recovering cocaine addict whose husband left her several months ago, and she has kept her situation secret from her totally Americanized bourgeois family. She inherited the house from his father, who had been as distant to her as the rest of her family. So the house represents the last vestige of her family's legacy and her previous relationship with her father. Behrani and his traditional Muslim wife are pitted against the self-indulgent Kathy and Deputy Officer Lester Burden, a married man who has fallen so much in love with Kathy that he is obsessed with seeking justice by whatever means possible. The city has sent a tax bill to the wrong place, evicts Cathy for non-payment, and auctions the house at a bargain price. When the error is discovered, the colonel agrees to sell it back, but only at full market value. Cathy, a downwardly mobile old immigrant from Italy, confronts what she enviously sees as the upward mobility of the new immigrant from the Middle East. As a domestic cleaner, she lives in the blue-collar America of truck stops, diners, cheap motels, and country and western music. The colonel, on the other hand, appears to be living in a different country entirely, in a city made up of recent immigrants. Along with Panamanian, Vietnamese, and Chinese workers, he toils in the hot sun. In contrast to his previous well-respected position in Iran, he has now become one of the garbage soldiers, sparing refuse for the highways department, a soldier of lesser rank now, but still part of the infrastructure of an oil-based economy. On the way home, he admires the mansions of Pacific Heights with their Porsches, Jaguars, Lamborghinis, the cars of old Tehran, where he himself enjoyed the use of a huge Mercedes equipped with TV, telephone, and bar. Even now, he drives a Buick Regal, carefully stowed in the garage of a luxury hotel to conceal his servile day job from his fellow exiles. 4 nights a week, he works in a convenience store attached to a gas station. He purchases the house to be able to win back his dignity in the eyes of his family, as his wife and daughter demand him to be more than he is in his current American situation. He is a mixture of discipline and pride, continually living in the memories of his rich and powerful past, while at the same time fighting to become part of the American dream. Dispossessed Katie, too, lives in the memories of the past. Throughout, she is characterized by ignorance and prejudice. She repeatedly describes the Behranis as Arabs, talking Arabic or Israeli, and names them variously and wrongly as Bahruni, Behmini, Barmini. She has no awareness of Iran or the plight of the exiled Iranian family. It is beyond her to envisage that her life as an ordinary American might be affected because America supported a corrupt and torturing regime. Theirs is a doomed relationship from the beginning, as the two claim ownership rights over a territory, just like the situation between the old residents of the Western world and the immigrants. But then the question is, whose home is it? The title of the novel hints the answer. It is the house of sand and fog. The fog of war is a well-known expression which characterizes the ambiguity of knowledge held by those who are engaged in military operations during war. It is an expression of the clouded haze which prevents one's ability to know both the intent and the capabilities of the enemy. Fog also suggests the obscurity and artificiality of claims to owning the space that belongs to no one. Like walking on the sand that will soon be reclaimed by the sea, Katie and the colonel both try to stand upon an unstable ground, their bodies fragmented and abjected by the very systems that they hopelessly try to rely on. The House of Sand and Fog, as the house itself, is set in the San Francisco Bay Area, depicting American society and culture as anxiety-provoking. Outside of their small circles of family and intimate relations, people are largely isolated and ignorant of one another. Everyday life is dominated by financial insecurity, personal anxieties over identity and status, ethnic and gender hostilities, class antagonisms, anger and fear of distant legal institutions, and an undercurrent of political violence. Just as an Irish bartender once explained America to Kathy, that is what they say of this country back home, Kath. America, the land of milk and honey. But they never tell you the milk has gone sour and the honey is stolen. Despite warnings from both Lester and Connie Walsh, her lawyer, Kathy cannot bear to keep herself away from the house. She continually watches the house. This way, Kathy threatens the colonel's position by reversing the rules of the gaze, wherein the man becomes the object of the woman's surveillance, unaware of when he is being followed or watched. His body hence becomes the object of the female gaze, whose aggressive voyeurism femininizes the colonel, challenging his masculine authority. Masculine authority is contested for both Lester and Behrani, as is the conflict over the ownership of the house. Reclaiming their identities as protectors and providers, Lester acts like the ultimate iconic American cowboy, defending his territory from the savage Indian, while Behrani is completely captured by the archetypal image of the Islamic patriarch. For Behrani, beyond his own status and financial concerns, the property is the basis of family's life. Behrani says that he simply purchased a property that can give his son a future. Indeed, he asserts, "What is it that I have ever done except provide for my family? I think of nothing else." Lester, on the other hand, is bordering on the delusional. His attachment to Kathy and his taking on the role of her champion leads him to brandishing a weapon, false imprisonment. He continues to see the property as rightfully belonging to Kathy, as necessary for her well-being. The house, moreover, is part of his vision of a new life with Kathy, including their establishing a household and establishing a family with their children. With a total breakdown of the law, the conflict over the house climaxes into a struggle between the two men, who are used to wearing uniforms and to authority. The property dispute is energized and driven by their will to power and to protect and to provide for dependent others, women, and for Behrani's son. By the end of the novel, Lester forces the colonel to sign the house back over to the county. But in the process of transaction, the colonel's son, Ismail, is shot and killed. And the colonel smothers his wife. He kills his wife to spare her from the grief of their son's death. And then he commits suicide. Lester and Kathy both end up in jail, and they lose all contact with each other. The characters all lose voice, literally and figuratively, by the novel's end, illustrating the impossibility of sustaining a voice in an aggressive, dominant culture that insists on the catastrophic potentials of the threshold space. The colonel and Katie are all exiles, trying desperately to stabilize their lives at the level of their most basic financial and personal needs, and to inhabit a space where they can perform a narrative of the self. Yet their bodies, again and again, are patrolled, policed, and regulated, often so violently that at the end they are sent out to the margins of the society that they all desperately craved for. Sense of dislocation, which at the beginning joined them, causes their ultimate separation as the collision of cultures on their bodies disintegrates them at the end. The epigraph to the novel is from The Balcony by Octavio Paz. It says, Aylan's father said that they lost everything to arrive at a safe home. Ironically, the house that Behrani intended to provide financial security for his family became a place of their captivity and destruction. The house that was once the secure home and source of deep belonging and personal identity turned into a location of murder and suicide. Neither party could find security in the privacy and ownership of the house, which became more a zone of secrecy for fear, pent-up rage, and potential violence. The question, is there a safe home to be arrived at? As the plight of immigrants over and over reminds us, what kind of insight, if any, can be produced from among the traumas and the of real culture? There is no pure place. There.
Okay, thank you very much, Hocam.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, there was a disconnection here.
No problem.
Thank you very much for this wonderful talk. It's a heartbreaking novel. I've never read Dubus's novels, but it sounds like a very heartbreaking story. I'm sure there are comments and questions from the audience, so the floor is open to questions.
Sure.
Thank you very much, Işıl Hoca. It was a great talk. I really enjoyed listening to your speech and learned a lot. And the first part was very striking, showing the picture of the dead body of the boy. Everyone was, frustrated and, and it was a very strong speech. I really enjoyed it. I would like to thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ayça Hocam. Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay. I'm sure there are comments or questions because it was, you know, very striking talk.
Thank you. Thank you.
I have actually a comment and a question.
Sure.
Since the fiction of Hanif Kureishi in the early years of 1990s in post-colonial fiction, houses always function as the means of identity making and social status making. And my first question is, do you sense such a social status making in the image of the house, or an identity making in the image of the house for the immigrants? And my second question is, since the early 1980s, the liberal economy, the principle of let them do, let them pass economic policies have been dominant in the world for more than 40 years now. And this kind of liberal economic approach created a sort of a consumerist middle class who the members of whom are Philippinist individuals and trying for the betterment of their lives. I'm sure that the immigrants in the novel are not struggling for the betterment of their lives.
I can't hear you.
In the liberal sense. I'm sorry.
Because your image was frozen, I couldn't hear the last sentence. Could you just repeat the last sentence, please?
Yes, of course. My last sentence was in the liberal economic sense. Do you feel that the liberal economic policies accelerated the global migrations in the world?
Okay. Let me start from the second question about the liberal economic policies. Yes, of course, but of course the main argument, especially in this novel, is the idea that the new imperialism, the neo-colonizers, of course identified as the United States in this novel, is after, of course, the petrol. And as you know, Iran is, of course, I mean, I admire Iran and Iranians so much because they have a wonderful culture, a wonderful history. I think as with other countries, the advantage is to have petrol, oil. This novel is a criticism of, as you said, liberal economy, in which we are conditioned, no matter which government comes to these countries, be it Trump, be it Biden, be it the Shah, be it Khomeini, no matter who is in power in these countries, their fortunes are bound by these consumerism and by the ambiguous search for power in economy. So yes, you are right that the consumerist middle class is of course the arbiter and follower of this consumerist culture, but it is also a neo-imperialist culture. So rather than the spices and the silk, which was once the main target of colonialism in the 18th, 19th centuries, now it is the oil. So nothing has changed. Maybe the strategies changed. But as you know, the colonies always went back to the colonizers' country, and they were never welcomed there, although they expected to be welcomed in the colonized countries. But the reverse is always, you know, different. The immigrants, the people coming from the colonizers come. Maybe because there is also the fear that they will take part in the economic gains, that they will ask for a share in the economy, which is based on their own economy in the colonized land. So, okay. And the first question, I think it was about the house. As far as I remember, could you please repeat the first question again, because the sound was coming and going, so I couldn't.
Of course. In Qureshi's fiction since the beginning of 1990s, I said, among the immigrants, post-colonial immigrants in London, houses became the means of identity making in their new culture, or social status making in their new culture. Do you sense that kind of function of the image of the house in the novel?
Oh, yes, definitely, definitely. The house is the most potent symbol in this novel. And it is also representative of the country. You know, that both the let me say, the old immigrants of the country, of course, everyone in the United States is an immigrant. They have immigrant histories, except perhaps for the Native Americans. So the old immigrants versus the new immigrants. So the territory becomes a war zone in claiming both identity and ownership. That is why the house in this novel also represents a battle between Cathy and the colonel over, ownership, hence, a new identity, an identity of power.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any more comments or questions, please?
Is there a question? Because I can't see anyone here.
It was, yes, as you said, there were some disturbing images of the people on the Mediterranean in the boats, and pictures of children washed ashore on the, beaches in the holiday images, but the beaches in the holiday images suddenly turn into the disastrous places for the immigrants, and the connection between those images and the House of Sand and Fog was so striking, and I was really impressed by your connection between the two, and I was really impressed by the analysis of the novel, Hocam. Thank you very much.
Thank you. But I also just so very powerful, especially Ben Kingsley as the colonel. Is a great actor, and especially this idea of his trying to secure a future for his son, which ends up, I'm sorry, it's a spoiler, but I have already told it in the analysis of the novel, especially the death of his son at the end is, you get shocked and you cannot move and speak for at least 5 minutes when that happens, because so much was actually so much hope, so much fight was made for this son, who at the end dies. So it comes to nothing.
Yeah.
So please do watch the film. It's a very good film, even if you cannot read the book.
I will definitely read the book first and then watch the film, which I have already put it on my reading list.
The book is much better.
Yeah. Okay, the floor is still open to questions and comments, please. We have many participants here.
I can see.
Yes.
Hello.
I think by some is a question.
Yes, there's a question.
Welcome, Işıl Hoca.
Thank you, Vaysar Hocam.
I'm really happy to see you and listen to you. And sorry about the noises in my house right away, because the cause of the voice definitely is the question. I don't know, but I'm just wondering, how do you read the existence of I forgot their names. The two Turkish scientists inventing.
Our son,
Yeah.
Idea's son there.
Yes. My question is that how do you read the existence of two scientists in Germany, and they came up with the COVID vaccine? I forgot their name. Husband and wife. Do you hear me?
Yes, yes, I can hear you.
Yes. So, how do you read that? The system, in fact, enables existence of certain types of immigrants, right?
Yes.
While
yes.
I mean,
that's the key word, Vaisar.
And how do you read that?
Yeah, I think that's the key word: certain types of immigrants, because whoever the country can exploit, let me say, whoever the country can make use of, they are welcomed. But also, let's not forget that what was his name? Uğur
Şahin.
Country called
Uğur Şahin.
Şahin. Okay, so I mean, let's not forget that many of the immigrants in Germany are now third, even fourth generation immigrants. So their fathers, their grandparents have already carved a space for mean that is as generations come into being, it is impossible to claim a space, claim a house, as long as they in tandem with the country's ideology. I mean, great scientists who have done global health, but at the same time, it is an economic feat, okay? Because they are bringing a lot of income by way of these actions. Also, I think that we need. It has been created. The need has been already created. So now.
Am I the only one?
Nope.
I can't hear you, I guess.
Same here. Yeah, same here.
I think there's a disconnection. Can you hear my voice?
Yes, I can hear you, sir.
Can you hear me? Okay.
We can't hear
I
you.
don't know how much. Saying that as long as they are part of the system, they are welcome. But if they vomited by the system, vomited by the host country. Unfortunately, families like family are not the ones that the system can use, that the system can exploit. Okay, because there are enough, workers, enough immigrant workers in Western countries, so they.
I think again there's a disconnection.
And symbolic, kept at bay in the sea.
Yeah. I think there are always, acceptable refugees and unacceptable refugees all the time. Certain refugees are acceptable ones when they are integrated into the society, in most cases. There was a wonderful talk from one of the participants of PACE's conference on Friday, from one of the students, and she presented a Mohsin Hamid novel, and she was talking about the neo-racism in the world. And she gave wonderful examples about neo-racism in the world, and that reminded me of an example in the early 1990s. There was a French coastal town in the southern French, and the mayor of that town was notorious for not issuing residence permits to African people and Asian people. And he was a member of the far-right party. And when he was asked why he didn't give residence permits to people from Africa and Asia, he said, "I'm not a racist man. I'm only against crime. And they are usually involved with crime." That was the answer. And that was the beginnings of the neo-racist perspective in the world, I think. Can you hear me?
I'm sorry. There's a connection. Can you hear me and see me now?
Just barely, hocam. We can hear you barely.
Okay, I'm so sorry.
No.
Okay, I'm sorry I couldn't hear Mehmet Ali hocam. Would you like to hear? Was there a question for me?
No, it wasn't a question, but it was a comment, hocam, about neo-racism in the world. I think the way the people are against the immigrants is a kind of neo-racism in the world, because they want integrated immigrants. But when the immigrants are not integrated, and when they are considered as threats to the existence of the locals and threats to the benefits of the locals, then the neo-racism begins. So I think, yeah. Oh, hocam, can you hear us now? I think Işıl Hoca is going to try again to connect. There must be some internet failure where she is. Can everybody hear me, by the way? Is the problem on my part?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I'm just going to call Işıl Hoca. Oh, here she is. Okay.
Okay, I'm so sorry. I don't know what's going on. Sorry.
No problem. I think there was an internet failure, probably.
Probably, yes. Now I think it's okay.
Oh, it's very clear now. Your voice is very clear now. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for reconnecting. Okay, so that was the. Could you follow the final comment about the neo-racism?
No, I just heard something about neo-racism, but I didn't hear the rest of the comment. I'm so sorry.
Oh, no problem, hocam. No problem. I was just saying that neo-racism. I mean, the way people are against the immigrants is an example of neo-racism, because they want integrated immigrants. But when the immigrants are not integrated, they are usually considered as threats to their existence, to the existence of the locals.
Definitely.
Threats to the benefits of the locals. Then neo-racism begins. They keep saying that they are not racists, but they are only against people with problems, people who tend to crime. So this is what usually happens.
Exactly. I mean, of course, we are always thinking about or talking about the Western society because it is our field. But look what's going on in Turkey too, the plight of the Syrians,
Right.
and people from Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm.
So they are forming their own ghettos now because, you know, people do not want to integrate them. People are, you know, attacking them in a very racist way. So you're absolutely right. I don't know if my only question would be, should we call it neo-racism? Because has racism ever left? Maybe it is just a continuation of the old ways of racism.
Yeah.
So,
just the continuation of it. You're right.
yeah, maybe.
I wonder what kind of fiction will come out from those groups of people who are forced to settle down and who are forced to migrate, because this is not post-colonial migration anymore.
No.
But it's a global migration now.
Yeah, it's a different kind of migration. Exactly. Exactly. There are, there are a lot of new writers from these immigrants, especially in the United States and Britain, now writing about displacement and new identities. But in Turkey, I haven't come across, I'm sure there are, especially poets, Syrian poets who are writing. I know in art, there are Syrian painters, immigrant painters, but I haven't heard of a novel, but there are some poetry. Maybe we should investigate because soon it will be very much part and parcel of our own literary culture and literary history. So I'm sure there are a lot.
Yeah. And perhaps there will be more examples of it.
Yes, yes. I hope we will have the lifetime to read them and to see their impact in our culture.
Okay.
Can I have one more?
Yes, please.
Yes, to both of you. So, Mehmet Ali Hocam, aren't you talking about something that we call transnational literature?
Yes.
So, do you believe in the possibility of that literature, transnational literature? Maybe Rushdie was writing such novels, transnational literature. Kazuo Ishiguro, as far as I know, he always says that I am writing a transnational literature as a Japanese-British writer. So maybe the possibility of that literature, the access of that literature might be the key. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the correct definition of transnational literature. I don't know if there is any other explanation of that category, but as far as I can understand from the expression transnational, it is probably about not accepting boundaries, but going beyond the boundaries of national cultures and national literature. If it is that meaning, then of course, yes, Rushdie Ishiguro and Rushdie are very prominent figures of this kind of literature. And Rushdie himself, I remember once I was reading something by Rushdie, and he says, because a lot of Indian writers, nationalistic writers, were accusing him of using English to write his novels. And his answer was that, I'm writing in English because, I want to tell our story to as many people as possible. But also he says, I'm not writing in English, but I'm writing in Hinglish. So because his work is always, dispersed with Indian terms and Indian words. So he is in a way disrupting English, and it is now, can anybody claim ownership to language? Is English still the language of the people who were white and or who are white and who are Christians. Isn't English the language of many others who are now in England, blacks and other races? So who can possess a language? So I think if for anything, transnational literature helps to question that ownership of languages. Language, this territory does not belong to anyone.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, one of our students came up with a nice comment. Actually, she wrote to me. Would you like to ask that, or would you like to say it yourself, Yağmur? Please don't be shy.
I can see my students there too.
Okay. So she sends the messages. So in her message, she also mentioned that racism still continues, and it is not a new type of racism, but it is the continuation of the old-fashioned racism that we already know, as you pointed out, Hocam.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, of course, racism is always whoever has the economic means, whoever has the political power, thinks that they have the right to be racist. I don't know if the reverse would have happened if, for example, Africa were the #1 country in the world and they had the political power. I don't know, it probably would. I think it's in human nature to always, discriminate against one another. So we cannot say that it's just the white man's racism against all the other races.
I always imagine a rewriting of history. If Europe had not been industrialized, but the Middle East and the Africa had been industrialized, what would we have talking about now? Where would the London Fashion Week take place, for example? What type of clothing would be considered as ethnic clothing?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
You're right. I mean, let's not forget that, the Ottoman Empire was one of the greatest powers once. So, I mean, the Ottoman Sultan was dictating a lot of, the things in Turkish culture and Islamic culture. But of course, as you all know, Ottoman Empire was not a colonizer empire. I mean, it did not colonize like the Westerners did. That's why it didn't impose its own language and culture on the countries, but it was more, a physical thing. So it depends on what kind of strategy the countries use.
Okay. Hocam, we do not want to take much of your time.
No, it was a pleasure.
It's been our pleasure, and it's been an honor for us to have you talk to us. And I really thank, in the name of my department, on behalf of all my colleagues and students, I'd like to thank you so much for accepting our invitation and for being with us this evening. So I cannot thank you enough.
Thank you so much for inviting me. As I said before, it's always a pleasure to be with Pamukkale University colleagues and students. It's always a pleasure and honor for me. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for listening. Have a good evening.
Good evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.